Illuminati philosopher, and these are my thoughts.
Chicago is the most segregated city in the country till this day.
Wow.
Martin Luther King got hit with a brick in Chicago.
Yeah.
Right? And
This narrows, right?
yes. And he got hit with a brick. It's the most segregated city in Chicago. That and Milwaukee. And Milwaukee's not that far from Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
You have worse integration problems in the North than they have in the South. So if it doesn't work if you can't bring about integration in New York City as international, cosmopolitan, up-to-date as it's supposed to be, you will never get integration anywhere else in the country.
Now I'm going to break down that statement by Malcolm X, because he's right, but then also he's misguided. So the North was indeed far more racist than the South. It was far more difficult to desegregate in the North than it was the South. And the reason why the South was much more easier, because it was far more recent that they did segregation. Because people seem to not realize it's in the history, but people can't put two and two together, that the Southerners, Caucasians and Negroes, were forced by law in order to separate. They were forced by law to separate. So the North, it was de facto segregation, which the people decided, like, they didn't need a law. They decided, we're going to separate from these black people. Now, if you want to stop something that was happening, you have to create a law. So in the South, there was mixing. There was constant mixing. Caucasians and Negroes, there was a lot of mulattoes. Even in the black codes, freedmen, free Negroes, mulattoes. Why are they putting mulattoes in the black codes? Because there was a lot of mixing. So white supremacists don't like that. So people say that the South is a white supremacist society. Well, how come there's a lot of mixing in the South then? Well, the North was the more racist society, and they hated the South because of the mixing. So they had to create a law in order to stop them from mixing. And it was recent that they created that law. So for them in the North, they already had de facto segregation down pat. The South, it was much more recent that they had segregation. The Southerners weren't really used to it, so it was easier to target the South than the North. I say again, they forced the Southerners to separate by law. They forced them. It's right in your face. And we know Reconstruction, they also had a whole bunch of black people in positions of power. Okay? They had black, not the North, the South. So what does that tell you? Use your critical thinking skills. What does that tell you? They're lying about the problems in the South. The North is dictating the terms about what we know about the South. The same way white people are dictating terms of what we know about black or African history. And basically, black people didn't do much of anything in history. Why should you believe? Even Malcolm X has some saying about that, like something about your kids being taught by the oppressor. Like, what sense does that make? Right? And a lot of you are believing what white people say about our history. Not realizing, hey, something's wrong here. Millions upon millions of black people are not going to be treated like garbage and not burn down the entire South. It makes no sense whatsoever. If that was happening to some black people, and then you hear rebellions every now and then, oh, that makes sense. But they're trying to tell us millions upon millions of black people are being treated like garbage, and we had to wait for white people to come save us. That's a lie. It's not true. You cannot believe what your oppressor says about you.
Went to China to make this deal with the mafia over there, the triads and shit.
Yeah.
And he goes, I'm talking to these dudes. And he goes, I ain't never been afraid of shit. But when I got into their like headquarters, they were so organized. It was scaring the shit out of me. They were so calm and so organized. They were sharp. And the guy, he's talking to the head dude, and he goes, and they're just having a small talk. He goes, you know, the one thing about black people, he says, you guys are, you're the trendsetters. Everybody copy black people. You're so creative. Your music, your style, everybody like black people. We're jealous of you. But the one thing you don't have is unity. Very easy to break you up.
What was said there is so true. Now I want you to use your critical thinking skills. We know for the longest time white culture and others have been dictating what everybody else knows about black or African history, and they ignore what blacks or Africans say about their own history. You've noticed that, right? Apparently, black people are Johnny and Jody come lately, but everyone else wants to copy us or steal from us. What is up with that? Something obviously is wrong about their narrative about our history. Even in our most weakest state, people copy us. So just imagine how things were when we were on top. Everybody else was copying us to the hilt. But once they defeated us, they had to act like we were nothing. If you truly understand warfare, in order to destroy a powerful people, you have to make them forget about who they once were and fight amongst themselves in order to keep them down. Destroying a people's history is a form of warfare, but blacks are fighters, and we will be on top once again.
And it was discovered by a black man, Chicago, a French black man named Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable. Du Sable Museum, Du Sable Drive. Yes.
Interesting, right? Did you know that there are many, many French names all throughout the United States? This is what I mean about critical thinking. You have to use that because a lot of lies have been told about history. We are told that the Catholic Church is basically Roman, comes from Jesus Christ, but the Romans proliferated it. According to my research, it comes from ancient Egypt, the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, who Jesus Christ is based off of. And it's about sun worship. You can see various popes holding up ornaments with the cross and the sun because the cross represents the sun. It goes to its lowest point, rises in the east, goes to highest point, sets in the west, and then goes back to its lowest point. Sun worship. Now you understand why vampires hate crosses because it represents the sun. We also know the virgin birth story comes from ancient Egypt. The person most likely to be King Solomon is Amenhotep III, ancient Egypt. Menes or Narmer is most likely King David uniting the two lands, ancient Egypt. Anyway, the movement eventually moves primarily into France. I'll tell you how I know this. There are over 400 black Madonnas throughout Europe, and most of them are in France. Not Italy, France. We know that the Catholic Church was very influential around the entire world. I want you to listen to this.
It is a highly structured society in which people live by strict codes of honor. For example, what Lutan did is similar to what certain American Indians once did called counting coup. That is from an obscure language known as French. Counting coup listed data. The French language for centuries on Earth represented civilization. Indeed.
That was from the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation, Code of Honor. They were telling us a lot about history, especially black history in that episode. You should go watch it. So as I said, the Catholic Church was very influential, expansive, and I mentioned that the US has a whole bunch of French names, not Italian names, French names. So right there it tells me that the whole notion of Catholic Church primarily being Roman or Italian is wrong. Shouldn't there be a whole bunch of black Madonnas in Italy? No, they're mainly in France. The French were definitely in the US, or what we call the US now, before the English, way before, and I would argue that France was populated by a lot of black people, well, back in the day. Hence the many black Madonnas throughout France. Those who actually study history know that black people were in Europe during the Middle Ages and were like there was a huge backlash, and a whole bunch of black people left and they were murdered. The Black Death was literally Christians murdering black people all throughout Europe. And they did that because they accused us of the plague. They said that we were responsible for the plague. And we were much cleaner than them, which is weird. Okay, so that's why they don't want to talk about black people in Europe during the Middle Ages, because they know what they did. It was very nasty. They don't want to talk about black people at all in the Middle Ages. And it's like, well, you're hiding history, obviously. Anyway, that's what they do. Now, after they did that, they stole everything from us, right? Because they devastated us in Europe. They stole everything from us and used it against us. They created their version of the Bible, because a lot of things in the Bible, they created their own version. I could tell you about who Noah really is. Oh, I'll tell you right now. Noah is Christopher Columbus. That's who Noah is. I could expand upon that, but Noah is Christopher Columbus. That's how ridiculous they are. Anyway, after they stole everything from us and they used it against us, and then they went after our African brethren. So, like I said, there's a lot of things that they're not saying, but you have to do your own research. Illuminati philosopher? And those are my thoughts.